We are Missoula Partners for Reintegration. We are a community coalition, so we have a lot of partners. We started with the help of the Missoula Interfaith Collaborative, where it was a vision of Casey Dunning that we needed to be active in this area, and that launched a much larger group than Nick was willing to do, so now we are independent. And we draw together people like you, agencies, providers, returning citizens from secure facilities, and people interested in making our community a safer place and making sure that everybody has a place at the table. We are today going to be focusing on why it's good to hire people who have returned from prison. And our speakers today will, including Liz Rance, who will introduce the rest of the panel, will be taking us through that. We want to save time for discussion, for your questions. We have some news about some of the barriers that may be changing in Missoula, and also about the need for new social enterprises, and that's part of what the panel wants to bring up.
Speaker just came.
Oh, good. Excellent. Hi, as Janet just said, I'm Liz Rance. I'm with the Missoula Interfaith Collaborative, and sort of ended up with PFR. Have a long history of working in corrections. There was a committee put together from PFR to look at jobs issues, and we've put this meeting together today, and we've done a survey of persons who have left prison, well, persons in prison also, about the barriers that they see to employment and the kinds of jobs they'd like to have, things like that. The survey has been done. The young man who is working on the data is here today and can tell you more if you want to hear it. We need one more squashing of the numbers to get really firm stuff, but not surprisingly, under the things that they listed as preventing them from being hired were previous lack of employment and criminal records. It's got other things, but those were the two by vastly. Like, they can probably see it. The big long purple line is the felony or the criminal record. Some of the other barriers are both the personal and the social ones. People who have been in prison for a long time may have very poor dental care, and you don't want someone working in your business smiling at your customers without any teeth. Education, of course, many of them do not have, some of them have excellent educations, but it may not be what they need to do the jobs they want. What's been found is that the three things that are really critical are housing, getting a job, and having peer mentoring, support groups, whatever everybody's different, but whatever their things are to keep them going forward. Socially, there are some big barriers. There is, of course, fear. If I hire an ex-felon and he works in my office, what's he going to steal when I'm not there? Irrational, I mean, but there are the felony box, which you're going to hear a lot about before the day is out, is huge. Discrimination. There are entry-level jobs. Right now, the employment situation in Missoula is, if you're willing to work, you can wash dishes, but those are not the kinds of jobs long-term that will keep people from reoffending and from being reincarcerated. So you're going to hear today from Landy Holloway, who is the State Department of Corrections Director for Reentry and works here in the Missoula P&P office. You're going to hear from Bob Garlotti, who is with Meineke Car Care, and he will talk about the advantages that he has experienced in hiring people who have been incarcerated. Where are we lined up here? Jimmy Evans is he's going to tell you whatever he wants to tell you about his own experience, personal experience, but I asked him to be on the panel because he also has some knowledge and experience about ways to create new kinds of opportunities for returning offenders. We call them returning citizens. I can't have it. And Greg, I apologize, I can't pronounce your last name. Greg, same. I've asked him to talk about whatever he wants to say, whatever he's comfortable saying. But he came up with a, I think, very creative solution to getting a job. And we could have gotten a lot of people who work at Home Depot, but I wanted to get people talk about getting into some more creative alternatives. So Landy, tell us why they should hire returning citizens and what you'll do to help.
Thanks, Liz. So I think I realize that I'm the only government person sitting up here at the panel, so you want to hear.
I've been there.
Yeah. You want to hear the least from me, so I'll just give you some of the kind of the basics there. Is that for those in Missoula County, we have about 1,400 people who are under felony supervision. And in addition to that, we also have a local pre-release center here. And there are approximately 200 people, men and women, in that organization as well. And if we start looking at more numbers, we look at about 116 as the average for the last 3 years of people who have left the prison system and have come to be on supervision in Missoula. So those are kind of a variety of numbers. There's a lot of people who are already on supervision. There are people who are coming out of the prison. There are people who are coming through a community corrections facility. And at those different levels, there are different supports in place. Significant barriers, I know Liz has already spoken to this to a certain degree, but employment is a huge barrier. I mean, we see that just from the survey that we did was of about 200 people. Employment, it's an interesting thing because employment rates right now, according to the Missoula Job Service, is that Missoula's unemployment rate is at 3%, Bozeman is at 2.2%,
Wow.
Ravalli County is about the same, and everyone's almost under a 5% unemployment rate. So you might say, if unemployment rate is so low, why are we here advocating for returning citizens to have a job? So it's not so much about getting a job, it's about retaining that employment. And it's also about being able to have gainful employment, to be able to reintegrate successfully, be able to provide for your family, be able to provide restitution for victims, be able to provide for your own safe housing if you're left in not safe housing and you're stuck over here in a corner where maybe there's a lot of other people who are maybe have not removed themselves from criminal activity. It's that gainful employment which is going to be a key factor. And if you're employed, you're actually doing something with your time and less of a chance to commit more crimes or recidivate and go back. Now, with that, there is a huge stigma. I mean, I'm a probation and parole officer, and I've done that for about 20 years now. And many times I've talked to people in my office about how hard is that. We go through a phase about, well, there's a shame that comes with the conviction, and maybe they don't want to say anything about that conviction, or they don't know how to talk about it. It's difficult to talk about why there's a gap in your history. And then there's the flip side, where somebody comes in and maybe in the system we've told them, talk about it, and they come in and they just say, oh, and they tell you their whole history, and you're like, well, that's too much. That's just a little too much, because it's about communication and relationships. And I keep saying that every time I speak, is how do you create a relationship there, and how do you communicate your needs and to be able to still be transparent and to be able to share that information. So the National Institute of Corrections has consistently shown that unemployment is linked and is one of the most important conditions that leads to less offending and reoffending. And again, I want to say this, that I think there's a lot of different mentalities out there in our community at times, and some people say, well, they don't deserve a job. Well, I tell you what, if somebody has a victim, they most certainly do deserve a job, because it's not just about that returning citizen, it's also about the victim. And again, it goes back to public safety. If somebody's employed, they're less apt to commit new crimes. So why would you want to hire somebody who's on supervision? Well, first of all, let's start if you're talking about somebody who's in the pre-release center. They have a treatment coordinator, they have a job developer, they have case managers who are there, and they're a support system for those individuals that are in the pre-release center. When you come out to somebody who's maybe on probation or parole or conditional release, and they're being supervised in the community by a probation or parole officer, you also have somebody who can vouch for that individual on occasion. Maybe if there's problems at work, if you bring that probation officer into the conversation, they can be an advocate and help you develop that relationship. Many times I've heard that communication is the biggest issue, and that's sometimes where a PO gets to communicate a little bit differently with somebody who's on supervision than an employer, and that's just the nature of the relationship. And how do we openly talk about what are these issues, and maybe they can be minimized to a certain degree. Some things to ask as an employer, and I know Bob will talk a little bit about this too, is that when somebody comes in and tells you they're on supervision, that actually might be an opportunity to ask a few more questions about, well, what's that been like, or how did you spend your time while you were incarcerated? Do you have community supports? Can you tell me a little bit? If an individual is truly committed to making those changes, they're going to have been working on some programming that does some changes for their core values and their beliefs. And you're going to ask some questions, and you're going to see that that person is probably, they might be committed to being successful in the community. Then there's also that time when you hire somebody, if there's a release of information signed, and you can actually talk to that probation officer, and you can talk to that employer. Any average Joe off the street, you don't have that benefit of an advocate for you. That's another positive. Being able to give somebody a second chance, you know, I think that's a great opportunity. Sometimes when the people who've been returning from incarceration or been on supervision, the employment world also can look at them in a way that's an untapped workforce out there. If they've been overlooking these people for a really long time, there's a lot of skills and talent that's out there. And how you change that skill and talent into something that's marketable and gainful employment is very unique. We've seen some amazing, and I'll just say tattoo artists that have come out of the prison that, you know, wouldn't it be great if they had an artistic perspective you could get into there. But the prison systems are also doing some training. And when given a chance to somebody who maybe has been overlooked many times, there often is a level of loyalty that you've never seen. I have seen returning citizens in my office talk about how thankful they were for being given a chance, and for that employer to also understand that sometimes there's going to be bumps in the road and how to work with that probation officer. Liz is going to cut me off here in a second, so I got to get going. So we talked about, Liz mentioned the Ban the Box. Ban the Box is a nationwide initiative that's talking about removing the felony checkbox off of an application. There are 19 states across the nation who have already approved that, and it always creates a good level of conversation when it comes up, because it's not about not knowing whether or not somebody has been convicted of a felony. It's more about leveling the playing field right out of the box, or right out of the gate. It's looking at job skills and talents and references the same. It doesn't mean that you can't find out whether or not somebody's had a criminal conviction. There is a movement, there's lots of research out there that talks about running criminal background checks and criminal history checks when a person is being ready to be offered a job. I mean, I sometimes hear employers say, well, we don't want to, you know, we want to run background checks and that's expensive. Well, you don't really do that until you're ready to offer somebody a job. So banning the box oftentimes it is really good, because there's been, I don't know, I'm not an employer, I can't say this. I believe that there are employers who quickly overlook an application because there's a felony conviction on there and they don't want to take that chance. So again, Partners for Reintegration is really about advocacy and education, and if I can help at any level with the probation office or connect you with probation parole officers, I am happy to do that.
Comment. One of the barriers that I forgot to mention that I discovered while I was putting this program together is that many job applications have to be submitted online. And if you have no computer access and minimal computer skills, I mean, I looked at it, would take me a good hour to fill out one of them. And the city and the county and Home Depot, I don't mean to pick on Home Depot, they do a good job, but you know, all the big boxes now are electronic. That's a huge problem. We're going to talk more about banning the box later. Bob?
You ready for me?
Yeah. Here, I think you need to take that a little closer to you. You don't have to speak right into it.
I'm Bob Garlotti from Meineke Car Care. It's always extremely difficult to speak after Landy, simply because she kind of covers the entire area. I made the mistake once of speaking before her, and then I just felt like I was dumb after I heard what she said. So I'm never sure where to go. Everything she said. I know you said we talk about banning the box later, and I've always had a tough time getting over that hurdle as an employer who hires. I like to know stuff. I like to know it up front. If you are a company that has a policy that you cannot hire a felon, you waste a lot of time and money when you go through that process with somebody. I worked for an employer for 18 years, and we could not hire felons because we were a government contractor. And so as the federal government is easing
That's funny, because that's changed.
that opens that
Yeah,
up for us.
yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
incredible. We had to fire people when their background check would come back. I had to fire someone in California who was maybe the best employee I've ever hired, and they demanded that we fire her because she was duped into driving a getaway car at a convenience store robbery when she was 17. And at this time she was 29, and it was just incredible. So I'm not sure where I'm at with that, but I can tell you this, and this came to me while she was speaking. For our employees to have a background check, they fill out pretty extensive forms. One of the questions on the forms is, what are we going to find? Are we going to find anything bad? Tell us. And then when it comes up in the background check, that's good, we're fine. If something comes up that you don't mention, well, that tells me something about the person and their character. And so maybe I'm easing my position a little bit.
Do you have a story you can tell?
I just want to talk about, my experience in hiring people through probation and parole and the pre-release. My first experience with it was someone who would not stop coming in and asking me for a job every day. I think there were days he came in twice. It was pretty incredible, and I hire people. It's not necessarily about the long list of skills they can show me at the 5 places they've worked. It's the person. It's what they're about, and you spend time learning about that person. Ask them the right questions. Talk to people from the past. They're obviously going to be very willing to let you do that, signing releases so that you can go to their parole officer and discuss stuff. So my first experience was with an outstanding employee. He'd been in the program in and out, I guess, for about 9 years from the time he was 14 years old. Just a whole bunch of bad decisions in a row. And then I think at some point he made the decision that this isn't going to work for me and I've got to do something real. He came to me, we worked together for 1.5 years. Not the greatest mechanic in the world, and was kind of getting to a point where he'd hit the ceiling a little bit on what he was able to do, and we discussed it and talked about it, and I said, you've had a job for 1.5 years, you've got a great record, you've got a heck of a reference. Go find something. You can make more money than you can at this place. You can do better. And he did it, and it's worked out great. I see him every week. He comes in and we chat, and it was just a huge success story. Since that time, I've hired 4 others that had problems in the past. 2 were complete disasters and didn't work for me for a week. That's another benefit. If you're an employer and you hire somebody and they don't work out, you want it to not work out within the first week. The other 2 still work for me. And it has been just a great situation. The support you get as an employer, you can't get when you hire from the public. I'm kind of a numbers guy, so I'm 3 for 5 hiring through this program. I have 7 employees and I've hired 28 people. So if you do that math, I would say hiring through this program is about a 5-to-1 success ratio over hiring people that don't have the past and the record. Not everybody that has made bad decisions at some time in their life is going to be a bad employee. There's no way. And chances are, from my experience, they're better. They appreciate the job more. They work harder at it. They know where they don't want to go. And it's clear to me that I have a better success rate when I hire somebody who has made that decision and wants to overcome their challenges they've had in the past.
Bob, can you talk about like how you had to reach out and use those agencies as resources?
Well, sure. I mean, it's really my interaction was with you probably more than anyone, because you were the PO at the time for the first person I hired. So, yeah, whenever I felt uncomfortable, when I felt that, you know, we were not communicating, myself and the employee, correctly, you know, the whole idea of this was we're going to be completely open about all of this, how this works. You know, I realize that you have to show up every morning and do a urinalysis, and you'll be in right after. And you know, this is just a person who had to do extra work, showed up on time every day, stayed late if needed. You know, it was great. But whenever I would run into any difficulty, it's a phone call to Landy, and we'd talk for 5-10 minutes, and it's over. My problem was solved. She calls him in. The next day he comes in, and it's all over, and we're open again. We're talking about everything, and we kind of cover what went wrong. And I don't get that with anyone when they don't have that support group. I can't call some guy's mom and say, you really need to talk to him. But it's kind of what this was like. And it just gave me a real comfortable feeling, as well as it showed results, very positive results for us.
There's also a potential for a tax credit.
Yes. That's true.
We can talk about it, but it isn't an automatic thing, but there is one.
Right, yeah, it just has to do with the number of hours they work, and it's a federal tax credit. And I was laughing when Liz and I were talking about it earlier, because we've been in business almost 3 years, and that has not been of any benefit to me because we have not made any money yet. But I realize that most businesses at some point are either going to not exist or they're going to make money, and at some point that may be a benefit to me. But that's a nice thing to have. If they wanted to just, you know, write me a check, that would really be a lot better.
Yeah. Okay, Jimmy, move the mic down a little bit, please. You can have 10 minutes, Jimmy. I got to warn him because he talks a lot.
Yeah, I'm a talker. I definitely don't want to be talking at this panel. They had to kind of drag me up here. I'd much rather be in your seats, so bear with me. I've got employees in here, and my wife's racing down to be here as well from her appointment. But so if I say anything too much, come just tackle me and drag me off the podium. Thank you all for showing up. It's huge, whether you're here for great reasons or skeptical reasons. I appreciate you being in this room, because that's the start to a change. I have a kind of a unique scenario. I kind of involved with all of these things here. When I was young and I dreamed of being a coach and a teacher and a businessman, I never thought that I would be a criminal. Never once. Well, I became one. I'm not a criminal. I had a criminal decision that I had made. And I found myself locked up with other dirty criminals. And in that short time, I really grew a love for my ability to break down stereotypes. My whole life I had cast over criminals, and in the worst of criminals. I think one of the biggest problems that we face for across the board, I'm both an employer of criminals, and I am one. I own a business, and I also work for recovering criminals. I'm involved in MIC. I'm very much about trying to help this situation. PFR, I thank you guys for everything you're doing, because this is more important than just let's rally around the criminals. I love that Landy talked about the victims. I love that our story is a story that creates the healing and the redemption. And our stories aren't always easy, and I'm in the process of writing mine. But I'll tell you just a few things. 15 years ago, our company's only 15 years old. We have stores across the state. We had a gentleman, like Bob said. He came in every day. He'd just gotten out of Deer Lodge. I just got out of Deer Lodge, I need a job. And the manager at the time said, absolutely not. At that time, late 90s, jobs were also not, there was really low unemployment, and we were looking for people bad. So the manager said no. We said, well, you got to find someone. Finally, after day after day after day, the guy just said, look, I'll work below minimum wage even to just sweep your floors. That's it. I just want a chance. And I won't give you his name because he's a huge recovery story. But we gave him a chance. We gave him a shot. And 11 years later, he's still our longest employee. He runs our biggest operation. He has 5 other guys on probation and parole up in Great Falls, and they are just a great group. It's kind of funny. It's like watching a sitcom. He loves his guys. He has been clean since. He has never reoffended. He has continued going. I remember before I was a criminal, I was better than criminals at the time. I was like, he's an anomaly, for sure, he's an anomaly. And I still think he's an anomaly in some areas, but I never thought that I would look to mentor him and to follow him. And there's days in my life that there's no one else I could call but that man to help me get through the next day. I'm actually on supervision myself, and I will tell you, to testing, to landing in the office, my PO is extremely helpful. With my family, my friends, he's a lie detector, and he can be very stern and very hard and very big, but he's very about keeping us going. The first response isn't throw them back in jail, like society would sometimes want us to do. And that's been very helpful for me to know that POs have one rule: you tell the truth. And all of us who have been on supervision know that's the one rule. And I found that as long as we do that, it's great. Well, from an employer standpoint, like Bob said, I can't tell you, I wish all my guys were on probation. I wish that so much, because I don't have a Sean or a Landy or a Pip to call and say, hey, you know what's going on with them, and legally be allowed to do it. And not vindictively, not to try to get under it, but to say, hey, what's going on? One call from my PO to me is enough to say, okay, I'm happy to be at my job. And so the biggest thing that I think should be addressed kind of in this room is that not all criminals are the same. Not all situations are the same. There are not lumps of criminals. I lived it. I live it every day. Everyone has a unique story. And what I found when I was incarcerated, everyone had something. And if you can get past that first kind of impression or that first stigma, which I had to because I was there, I found that I was able to use my college degree to help guys in there. And most of them, and there are some that absolutely do not qualify the group that we're talking about. And I ask that all of us in this room re-examine. It doesn't mean you have to forgive them. It doesn't mean what I did or what we did is okay. It's the worst thing ever, and most of us carry that to our grave. But once you've done your time and you've done your payback to society, our quest is for healing. So I'm going to say 2 things before I wrap up. One, healing communities are the most important thing, hands down. If it wasn't for my community, my friends in this room, my beautiful family, with my church, my guys in my group that I attend, my program, my PO, if it wasn't for their support, I would have no reason to keep moving forward. And I don't quit. I'm going to end my life well. And it has not been easy, and I've made mistakes. And they rally around me, and they all come into the PO. There's been times I've had, I've had 6 or 7 people in the PO office with me, like, okay, how are we gonna fix this? Most of the time it's anxiety, or I beat myself up so much that I don't want to continue on. Not all criminals are that way. Sometimes we lash out with anger. And Bob would probably know it doesn't always mean they're angry at the job. It doesn't mean they're angry at the employer. That might be your opportunity to actually create a lifetime employee. And I'll tell you that the guys I know, the people that I walk with, the guys sitting in the fringes, and in my case, sometimes the lowest of the low, they're very, very grateful for a house. They're very grateful for a job. And they're mostly grateful for their clique, their group, their homies, or their family. And a lot of them don't have a family. A lot of us, I'm so lucky. And in our business, for those of you in here that own companies and you're thinking about it, we create a code of values that my employees will tell you we recite once a week at minimum. And that code of values reminds our people what we're about. One misstep can ruin it for all of us. One problem in a car could ruin it all for us. We have a code of values. I know Meineke has too, because I get my stuff done there as well. There's a code of values that says this is the type of family we're going to be in this business. And it's our job as business owners to review. And if you have a criminal that will look you in the eyes and say, I screwed up and I want a chance, that's enough of a start admitting that they're willing to start turning their life around. And it's not going to be easy, but that's my personal qualifier. Just look in the eyes and say, what'd you do? And with me, my friends know to a fault, I'll be like, this is what I did. And I just, I'm the guy that just lays it all on the table, But I want a chance. I will work harder. I will work longer than anyone else here. And so the first thing is the healing communities, being able to create that at our jobs, create safe places. Don't put certain people in certain work positions, but we all have spots in our companies where you can put people with boundaries. It's a safe place, that's a productive place, that's a beneficial place for them and for you. And honestly, if I have clients that have a problem with that and we're towing our line, then that's just a very small risk for the amount of people that have said to us in our organization about the guy in Great Falls. He is a gem to work with as a person. And he still carries himself as humble, he's thankful. He's been thankful to us for 11 years, and he's not going anywhere. He'll stay with us till he retires, and we treat him very well because of it, and we thank him. And he'll tell you that his healing community has to happen at home. It has to happen with our PO officers and our community groups we're in, and it has to happen at home. So that's the first step to be able to have this work for all of us, to create those communities. The second step is to, like I said, educate ourselves to be able to identify. Let's say you walk out of this room today and say, okay, I might give this a little bit of a chance. Just bringing in some criminals and starting to interview them is not going to be a winning situation. I would really encourage you to team up with MIC, to talk with Landy, maybe have a PO kind of join you on your first kind of interview processes, even if they're not under supervision. And if it is a criminal who really wants to work or reintegrate, they're not going to necessarily see that as a negative thing. In fact, they might see it as an advocate and something you're doing to help them, give them that chance. They have resources to help you identify, because like I said, just like the stereotype plagues us that are trying to make our lives better and healthier for both ourselves, our victims, and our families, there are also a group that don't want to change, that don't want to turn their lives around. There is true discernment there, and none of us in this room would tell you that that's not the case that I know of. But every person does have that opportunity. It's just a matter of what time and when. And so what I loved about MIC and about the probation office is they can help us. I know I can call my PO and say, hey, I'm thinking about hiring a guy. Can you run kind of some background on him, maybe find out what's going on and see if he's a worthwhile proposition, and what jobs would he be good at? You know him pretty well, what might help. But if my attitude is to help that person and get a killer employee, then just like I would for any employee I'm trying to steal from a competitor, I'm going to do some research. I'm going to, it's the same philosophy, except you're not stealing it from a competitor. You're trying to protect yourself for that opportunity. So I'd say the healing communities is the one thing that has working in my life. And it doesn't mean I'm perfect. It doesn't mean my story's going to be written easy. But having those people with me is all I need sometimes when I pick up the phone and say, how you doing? I know they care. So how can we do that for people? And then second of all, how do we get tooled up to be able to, as a community and employers and organizations, to help get the knowledge that we need? That's one thing I found in jail. I took for granted my education. I was in there, I was like, a lot of these guys were super willing to learn. I was hosting little studies, and we were learning all sorts of different topics, and I helped them write some resumes. And things I just take for total granted was just like mind-blowing. And I forget about that sometimes. And I'm like, a lot of criminals have not had education. And it's not until they get caught or they do their time that they realize, wow, I don't have much of it. I probably should learn this stuff. And I know a lot of guys that have gone through a lot longer sentences than I have that came out much more tooled and equipped than they were when they went in. So we have to educate ourselves, get knowledge ourselves on this topic, but we also have to see this as an opportunity to educate them. And you teach them a skill, like Bob would tell you, they love you for teaching them that skill, most. And it's not like they're going to leave you and maybe go get hired by another person who happens to love a criminal. The longevity and the commitment sometimes is incredible. And so it's the last thing I was going to say, is just be able to create those boundaries in that safe spot.
Thank you, Jimmy. That was great. You give Greg a chance. I'm going to actually bring Jimmy back when we're done for a minute. So.
Hi, I'm Greg, and
Move the mic down to the mic.
Yeah.
and I own a little company here in town. I'm an ex-convict too. I finished up my time about 9 years ago. I spent 14 years in the system. When I came out, when I discharged my time here in Missoula, I really didn't want a job. And so I did some other stuff, and then I decided it was time to find a job, and I couldn't get hired. You know, I was a little bit older at that time, twice convicted felon. I mean, McDonald's wouldn't even hire me, you know, and things like that. And I couldn't, it was just crazy. So I ended up getting a job at a grocery store, working in the produce department, and that worked out well, and, you know, and I married education, because I don't have education, so that helped. And so, you know, one day I just decided that I really don't like to work for somebody. I have my own attitude. And I walked out of the job that I had had for 3.5 years. And only based on what happened was all on principle. And so I walked out and started this firewood company 6 years ago. And didn't know what I was doing, had no idea what I was doing. And I needed help. And so I just hired guys that I either did time with or had been in I'd been in 2 pre-releases, you know, at different times, and that's how it all started. You know, the first employee I had, when I can still remember, I was working at Albertsons at that time, and he tapped me on the shoulder, and he was on a 10-day furlough. And I had been in pre-release with him a couple times, and I put him up in a hotel room, and things didn't work out well. But so when he got out of that jam, I had already started this firewood business, and he was the first guy that I hired. And I don't know, and I would go and pick him up because he lived at the Parole Center. So I live in Potomac, which is, if you don't know, it's 35 miles from here to town. So I'd go in and pick Sean up every day, bring him back, and I'd leave him a lunch and give him some change so he could make a phone call or whatever they would do. And so that's how it all really started, you know, was to just try to help another guy. And as my business grew, I needed guys, and, you know, guys would come and go, and, you know, and so a guy would leave, another guy would come up. And what I always did too is I always wrote to the guys I sort of knew in prison, or guys I did pre-release, always wrote, I still do. And so I'd be in contact with them while they were in prison or pre-release or whatever treatment centers they were in. And so I would get to know them that way a little bit, you know, through that. And the business just, and that's what I do. I mean, it really is. I've had guys live with me for 7 or 8 months. I've given them housing. I think I've given them some mentorship. I don't know. You probably have to ask them before you could ask me. And a job. You know, I just cut loose a guy. What do work for me, Andre? 13 months this time, and. You know, November 1st was his last day, sort of the thing. It was time to move on and find some bigger and better something to do. You know, you can only do so much, and you can hope that they do it. You know, I'm 5 out of 8. I mean, I'm really 4 out of 8. Andre screwed up my my percentages because I hired Andre twice. And this is sort of the downfall sometimes of hiring maybe a guy you know that you did some time with, and also, you know. It was hard. The first time that I had to hire Andre, he came riding up to my house on a 4-wheeler, and he was just down and out. I mean, down and out. He was using, and the probation officer was on him because he didn't have a job. So, you know, he came up to me. He brought this little girl. I mean, you know, it's a sad deal, you know. So I brought him in, and, you know, he worked for a couple months, but he'd be late. You know, he'd start to be late. And so, like I said, I live 35 miles from town. I told him one day, you know, you're 1 minute late, 9:01, turn around. Well, 9:02 he showed up. You know, those are the things, some of the tougher things that you have to do. You would do with a regular employee probably as well. But, you know, I've become emotionally tied to these guys. You know, I have. And I don't know. I mean, they're great guys. And, you know, I've had a lot of guys that aren't even, all my guys have either been pre-release or on probation, so they've all had some kind of structure around them. Mm-hmm. But now that these guys have left, and even though they're out on probation and some are in different towns now and doing things, 5 out of the 8 are doing well. I mean, they all have jobs. I mean, some of them are starting families, and they're doing some things that are really, really neat. And I still get to visit with them. And I'm going to go have lunch with one of the guys today after I leave here, and we try to meet once a week and sort of just see what's going on. And I mean, you know, should you do that with every employee? Maybe, you know, maybe not just a felon, you know what I mean? Maybe every employee needs, you know what I mean? Maybe every employee needs a birthday card when it's their birthday, or, I took these guys, I mean, what I've done as an employer is I've brought them into my world, and my world is a lot different than their world. And I grew up a lot differently than these guys did. I mean, I committed crimes, I did prison time, but our lives were completely different. And I brought them into my world, and it's great. You know what I mean? I take them to basketball games, I take them to Christmas plays, I bring them to, dinners, or my kids know them and they'll see them. And it's good. And I mean, I know we're here for the felons and all that kind of stuff, but it's probably good, like I said, for every employee, really, in all honesty. And, I'm continuing to do that. So that's, and the benefits, I don't know, I never made enough with the tax credits either. You know what I mean? I know I have a pamphlet, and I know that.
Has anyone used that tax credit?
I'm sure. I thought when I first got it that they gave you that money, so I thought that was golden. So, that's where I am. It's hard checking the box, but Liz, you mentioned this at the beginning. When you're on the computer and you have to check that box or whatever, you don't get to explain yourself.
Yeah.
All a computer sees is it kicks it out automatically, or the person that's looking at it knows automatically it has to go. So if you could go in and talk to that person, or if that person can maybe have a mentor or some sort of a person that could go with him on that interview,
Find out why.
just to say, tell him this is why he did it, you know what I mean? Because he's 12 years ago he committed the crime, or
Right.
she did this, so that's this and that, and I'm gonna end. I don't know what
And
else.
not all of them
that's
can
great.
write. Not all of us can write well either.
Oh,
So on an application, sometimes we're like, oh, I don't want this guy, and that doesn't mean giving them or him or her the time to talk with them. And granted, you're going to hear some of the same stories sometimes, but you talk with them, you might catch some nuggets. You might listen. We talk about that at MIC training about listening actively and openly without judgment. You find some things that motivate them, and if your position might motivate them, that might be the one little key to healing. And one thing he just touched on, which I love, is that we can't hang out with other criminals outside of work group or situations, and that's what I talked with my PO about. Luckily, he's supportive of approved people, but in a work group, like a Meineke or something, there's a level where you look over and you see someone else who's been through the ringer with you, and he's working hard. It creates kind of an accountability and kind of a camaraderie. It doesn't mean they're going to form a gang in your company all the time. It doesn't mean they're going to create ruckus, but it starts this level. And I know our Great Falls store, they look at each other, and when things are tough, they look at it and say, you know what, we're all in this together. We're doing it. They're not the one lone criminal sitting there in the organization getting looked at. So again, I'm not saying your whole staff should be pre-released, but having a few, also creates that level of healing community, especially for guys who don't have anything outside of their work.
Well, thank you. I wanted to have Greg tell his story because he hit on something really important. There are a lot of people who come out of prison, a lot of people, period. I have a son like this, who can't work for people. And helping them create ideas can be very helpful. Greg did it on his own because, he...
And that's something when I moved to Missoula, I started our little store here, and I've started 3 companies since I've been out, and like these guys are, some of them are making money and some of them were waiting patiently. But there is, as a community, especially with the stigma thing, to give him a chance. I mean, who wouldn't give him a chance to be able to buy firewood from him? There's a sense where if we have a community that rallies around, you know what, every time we buy something from him, that's one more thing that keeps from one of us being out on the streets or creating reoffenses, and or me, same type of thing. That's obviously it's always our fear as recovering criminals, is that it's all going to go up in flames, and that's a very hard thing to get over for us, and people sometimes don't understand how much we carry. A lot of us carry that shame and that stigma, and so being able to help out with that. And so grounds guys. So were you going to talk about that?
I'm going there,
Okay.
yeah. There are 2 things. Mike.
Oh yeah, that's right. Liz
Yeah,
is
we
loud.
need 2 mics. The guy with the camera says I have to use mics. There are 2 things that specifically I wanted to have come out of this session. One is the ban the box thing, and the county has taken it off of their application. Obama is taking it off the federal application. It's still on the city. My hope is, my understanding is, all we have to do is go and talk to Mayor Engen and we can take care of the city. It may be harder than that. I may want to have 20 of you sign a petition or come down to city council or something like that. But that is in the works and is going to happen. It isn't that returning citizens are going to go to work for the city so much as it's an opportunity to say to other employers why, and it's a PR thing, frankly. But the other big thing is what's called social enterprise. Missoula Interfaith Collaborative has a committee of business people that are looking at what kinds of businesses can be created to employ difficult to employ people. And it isn't just returning citizens. I mean, there are a lot of people who can't get jobs. Jimmy's work has been and knows a lot about other companies that are, other possibilities of ways to do this. We have one starting right here in town that I'm really excited about. The Open 8 Alliance is starting a tortilla factory. I mean, talk about creative. Is that where you would have gone with trying to start a business here in Missoula? They have visions of multiple lines of food, like Dave's Bread in Oregon. And they are staffing it entirely with people out of their client base. It's one thing to get people their first job, but people need to know that there's a chance for them to be actively involved in the company they're working for, to not just be the minimum wage slave, but to actually be a part of it. So that's, if that rings a bell for anybody, talk to me or Jimmy, or Casey Dunning is back there from MIC. But Jimmy, would you tell just a little bit about the grounds guy concept, just as a model? We're not saying this is the way to go, but that it's the kind of thing that's relatively easy to do with an investment up front.
Yeah, I've been really encouraged actually by that group. I wasn't sure at first when I joined it how it was going to flesh out, and we're still kind of waiting to see.
MIC group.
The MIC Social Enterprise Group. The caliber of guys in there are great and very creative. One thing that I love about getting businessmen together is they hate meetings, so it feels like if something doesn't happen at the meeting, we get frustrated and leave. And so I really believe things are heading in the good direction. The idea is to create a couple areas where there's a needed niche in Missoula. One of them we're looking at is potential, ground services, general services, snow removal, leaf raking, helping out, taking some of the burden there. Either teaming with an existing business through an acquisition or partnership, or starting our own. We're exploring all of that, but creating a couple jobs that have a buddy system. Half the staff maybe is not on probation but have a heart to help. The other half of the staff are willing to be part of that growth, and then wrapping that code of values I told you about: morning meetings, clean dress, tight uniform policies, so that Missoula can say, wow, that group is really kicking butt, kind of like these guys, like that story of wow, the stories we don't hear that don't make the front of the Missoulian. But also to be able to do things that are proactive, that after they were to leave us or something, they could move to another town and say, hey, I have actual marketable skills. Right now I'm in the process of learning woodworking, which I know is how hard it is, but I'm learning it myself partly just so that we can be able to teach. I want to learn a new hands-on skill because most of my skill sets are administrative or, in glass, which sometimes can be, not something you just teach somebody, on the side. But creating skills that can be taught relatively quickly, basic use of tools, basic use of mechanic. In the service industry, and Bob would attest to this, about 7% of high school graduates are going into vocational skill sets. And so I'm not, I don't have to be a huge economist, so there's a huge bubble of need for work. I'm sorry, we don't have people pounding down our doors that want to have a real skill and then be proud of that skill. We do believe at MIC, at the social enterprise, that if we create this business, whether it's a service-based business or a manufacturing, like a tortilla-based business, that teaching a craftable skill, something that they can rally around, continue to get better with that framework of a uniform policy, a code of values, that structure that even though criminals, we hate it, you love that structure. The structure and those rules can help you to be, like 9:02, you're late. We're used to that, and that's our decision. I don't mean to be overly rigid or slave drivers, but at the same time, we're hoping to take all of this input from all of you that are professionals in this field, Jana and Liz, and teaming up with some businessmen to say, now how can we make that pay for itself so that we don't have to go into the coffers of the taxpayers. We don't have to go into to donations all the time, that it can be sustainable and scalable. And so I don't know how to do that, and it's a huge order. And when Liz told me, I'm like, I don't think you're going to do it. I'm starting to believe that maybe it can be done on a small scale here in Missoula and see what happens. So if anyone is interested, we are all ears. We need help. We need, as much as financial help, we mostly just need really solid brain power to figure out how this would work well. Because if the model works well, businessmen are great with models. Show me a model that works, that pays for itself, it's an easy check to write. If it's too up in the sky and doesn't have the right framework, it's going to be a harder one to execute. So that's what we're working on.
Thank you. I want to have a few minutes for questions and get you out of here on time. I do want, though, Dale, would you stand up a minute? This is the young man who's working on the survey, and if you're interested in results or how he's doing that, be glad to talk to you. And Landy, you want to have a final word here before we throw it open? You said you did.
No, I gave it to you.
Oh.
I mean, I guess the one thing is that to keep in mind, if a person is the best fit for the job, that's the person who should get the job. Don't let a felony conviction rule that person out. So I think you're hearing that across the board. It's about skills and giving second chances, giving the person, but it's also about, you have a business to run, and as an employer, you want to give the best person the job with it. Yeah.
Thank you. Questions? Gentleman Beard.
We have a pretty good turnout today, but there are a few employers in Missoula who are not here. How do you, are you going to do something to sort of spread the word, or is there a mechanism or a group or a way of reaching out to the community?
Partners for Reentry works actively. It's got to be a one-on-one thing. You're right, they're not here. The Missoula Interfaith Collaborative has an advocacy network that goes out and works one-on-one with employers. All of you can go out and work one-on-one with your friends, but it is hard. It's a long road.
So one thing I could say, going to the Partners for Reintegration website, we'll have information on there as well. And I know that some of us have done various public speaking opportunities to large groups. And like I have spoken with the Society of Human Resource Management and the Job Service Employee Council, and we have good relations with the Employee Council. I know that I would imagine any of us would be willing, given the opportunity to come and talk to a large group or to an employer, we'd be happy to.
I'm also hoping we can do a city club talk in the spring that picks up a lot of the leaders in Missoula. And partly what PFR needs to do is to do some of what you're talking about and to run guest columns in the Missoulian.
Yeah.
Chamber of Commerce.
Chamber of Commerce, yep.
Yeah. There is actually another talk, I'm not involved with it, but someone in the PFR jobs group told me about one that's coming up next spring.
I'm giving you my blank look.
Yeah, we're both
Okay.
blank. But there is another talk coming up.
And I don't know if it's in the Independent this
It is.
week.
It
No,
is,
there
yeah.
is an article in the Independent today about employment for Ms. Perez.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's in today.
This might seem to be a little bit off of the subject, but I was hoping that somebody in here might know a little bit more about this. When we're talking about people who have to register as violent offenders, this whole issue is dramatically multiplied, and in my view, it's like you never get done paying for your crime. And it's actually almost impossible for people who are registered as violent offenders to find a place to live in Missoula, so forget about getting a job. And there is some kind of law that if you have not reoffended for 10 years after your conviction, you can get it expunged from your record, but nobody seems to know how to do that. And I was wondering, I mean, I have a contract with federal probation, and even my federal probation officer doesn't know how to make that happen. And so if there's somebody in here that has some info about how to do that without spending thousands of dollars for an attorney, that would be awesome. Yeah, Lindy, I'd like to get with you about that, because I've had 2 clients in the last few years that have come to me with this, and I don't know what to do.
So I'll just be very brief, and then you and I can talk afterwards, because I think it's a little bit off of the subject matter. But in order for someone, they just need to petition the court to have their conviction removed from their record, and an individual can do that on their own. So that is a possibility out there. It's in statutes. They don't have to have an attorney, so we can talk more.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
You can go to the Missoula Self-Help Law Center in the county courthouse. They have the paperwork, and they will be able to assist.
That's good to know.
That's what it's for.
And there's no
Even if they're
charge.
not actually living in Missoula County?
Yes.
Okay, because one of these people's on Lakeland, so.
Yeah, there's no problem, and actually they do outreach up there as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
Gentleman over in the corner, and then over here.
I'd like to say something more about the family box, because initially, when I heard about this a few months ago at another meeting, I felt very conflicted about it, and I felt like, I want to know. I want that box to be there, and I want to know. That was my initial reaction. And I had a discussion this morning with another business owner, and she felt that way, and after our discussion ended, she had changed her mind. Now, I thought that was interesting, that just like talking about it.
Yeah.
She came to a new point of view, and really it came down to, certainly we have concerns, very legitimate ones, and it's expensive and time consuming to waste a bunch of time with someone that ultimately maybe you're not going to hire them anyway. So it's a really big inconvenience for us, and money's hard to come by these days anyway, so we don't have the money and time for this type of expenses. But when you balance it with the fact that this is a person's life, and you cannot live your life if you can't find a place to live and a place to work. These are basic fundamental things to human rights. When you balance our desires and our needs with the need of the person to reintegrate into society, and we want society to become less violent, we want people to heal and become better and live good lives, then the choice is obvious. We have to put aside our own concerns, and still we're going to have the opportunity to find this out. It's going to be an inconvenience, it's going to cost us some money, but in the end, we got to think about the fact these are people just like ourselves, who without this change are never going to have the opportunity to even just live a normal life. And if they can't do that, how is the world going to get better? How are we going to be able to do a better job here in our society, here in Missoula, if we can't help these people to choose a different life?
And the issue is not keeping secrets from you.
Yeah.
It's simply to get you to the first sorting of the files. There's a 3-year gap on your resume. What happened? And if it doesn't make any difference if they were in a mental hospital or if they were out cruising around Europe. My kids could produce the airplane tickets that they used for their 3-year hiatus. We've all got gaps, but you got to be able to talk about it. And I promised this gentleman first.
I'll be real quick. Just something struck me from listening to this, that how important support is for a citizen reentering, particularly with regard to employment. Because I moved here 8 years ago from a large city in the east, worked for a good-sized business here in Missoula, and one of the things I've been so impressed with, whether it's good or bad, it is the fact, is hiring is done so much in Missoula through who you know.
Right.
Networking, in particular, that there's somebody, we try, the company I work for, we have so much turnover. We strive to hire people who are referred by current employees, thinking that gets us so much above the norm in terms of preventing that kind of turnover, people who just aren't going to work out. And so it strikes me that that is such a plus that needs to be highlighted both to the returning citizens as well as to the employers, is they're in so much better place if they lean on, whether it's a parole officer or somebody from the community to vouch for them. That's what employers want to hear.
Well, and as Bob pointed out to me earlier, if you have a job, don't leave it. Look for another job, but be steadily employed. There was a question over in the corner. Yeah, there you go. No, the lady with the red scarf.
Sunday.
Okay.
Lost my train of thought because my scarf was orange.
Sorry about that. We do lose our rods and coins as we get older.
I appreciate what the employers are saying about just valuing your time, and knowing up front if a person has a felony. But if not on the application, maybe it could be incorporated in the job description, just in one sentence. If you have a felony, company policy is you're not eligible to work for us, or something, however you would word that professionally. But it could, that might help.
There are some big companies that have absolute policies, and that's a bigger, working with them is not going to happen out of PFR. That's a national kind of problem. But there are fewer and fewer. I mean, Home Depot, Target will take,
Walmart.
yeah.
It was on Walmart a year ago, it's off now. And so the national online
Right.
job things, they're taking it off because they felt pressure.
Yeah.
If there are some that are still there, it would be good to know which ones have not seen the light yet, so that we can help them see it.
Yeah.
I know
But it's hard when it's a national.
This is really about awareness, I think, to me. This is the first step. I didn't want to have anything to do with criminals, like I said, and as I've learned more about this, I studied social studies. You'd think I would have wanted to know more, but I'm learning more about social studies in this. So I think the biggest thing is through positive stories, through stories like this one we heard today, through stories of success rates and what's happening. A network or owners can call other owners, or businessmen can call other businesses. What are you doing with this person? Calling Bob up and say, hey, what are you doing with this person? Also creates community within businesses, and then mostly just challenge you. Some of my friends, when I told them my situation, they were just floored, like, wow, I could just see the stereotype just blowing apart. And I'm like, I saw that with many people that I've known, that I'm like, it just blows my mind. I'm like, how did you do that, Well, because people change, and we all change, and we've all had things in our past that we would look back and say, I don't know what I was thinking. And so trying to be able to restart that awareness and start that on the heels of this down the box, it is, like Liz said, it's more the beginning of a discussion.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions?
Well, I just wanted to remind everyone of something too that I brought up in the discussion earlier today, was that we assume that somebody who has a conviction, they're probably going to do something again, so we're afraid to hire them. But just because we hire someone who doesn't have a record, we don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
What have they done that we don't know?
Right.
Exactly. It's very true.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in a sense, we ought to maybe put out a little bit of faith and try to actually, do something positive for the world, since we don't know that, we're going to be safe anyway.
Well, thank you all for coming, and we're here as long as you need to talk, except that I need to go
I know.
deliver food to the old folks.